The night was quiet in Coleruga, a small Spanish village half buried beneath the stars, wrapped in the stillness of 12th century Castile. The moonlight lay over the fields like folded linen, and from the little stone church came the sound of a single flame, soft, steady, whispering against the wind. Inside the church knelt a young man. His name was Dominic. His eyes were closed, his hands folded tightly, but his soul was burning. He had spent hours before the tabernacle, whispering the same words over and over. Lord, what would you have me do? It was the question that would shape his entire life. Dominic was born not into privilege, but into purpose. Even as a child, people noticed something different about him. When famine struck Spain, he sold everything he owned, including his precious books, to feed the hungry. He told his shocked companions, "Would you have me study dead skins when living flesh is dying of hunger?" That was his first secret, though he did not yet call it that, to see Christ in the suffering of others. It seems simple, yet in a world that trains us to protect, to store, to defend, this secret cuts deep. Dominic saw poverty not as a curse, but as a gift, a chance to draw nearer to the heart of God. In the hungry, he saw Christ's open hands; in the poor, Christ's searching eyes. To give was not to lose, it was to love. Years later, when Dominic began his journey across Europe, the landscape of faith was torn apart. The church was wounded by heresy, confusion, and pride. Many preached false gospels. Others abandoned faith entirely. Dominic didn't respond with condemnation nor with fear. He walked barefoot through villages and valleys, with only the gospel in his hand and peace in his eyes. His secret had deepened to preach not only with words, but with life itself. He would later say, "A man who governs his tongue saves his soul." And so, Dominic spoke only when love required it. He would walk beside strangers for miles, listening first, then speaking quietly, as if he were pouring medicine into an unseen wound. People didn't remember his arguments, they remembered his compassion. His very presence felt like prayer. There's a quiet power in that second secret. Let your life be the sermon. Not everyone is called to preach from pulpits, but everyone preaches something by how they live, how they forgive, how they listen. Dominic's footsteps led him to the south of France, a land torn between the fire of faith and the frost of disbelief. There he met the Cathars, a group who believed the material world was evil, that God could not dwell in flesh. Dominic saw their sincerity, but also their despair. He didn't attack them. He wept for them. He realized that truth cannot enter a heart that has never known love. And so he prayed, sometimes all night, sometimes for days without rest. He would kneel on cold stones until dawn, his tears staining the floor, whispering for mercy, mercy for the world, mercy for those who had forgotten the goodness of creation. That is his third secret, to pray not for victory, but for souls. Dominic's prayer was not a weapon, it was a bridge. In every soul, even the most distant, he saw a spark of divine light. He understood something most of us forget, that intercession is the purest form of love. To stand before God for someone else without asking for reward is to love as Christ loves. One night, exhausted after hours of prayer, Dominic fell asleep in the chapel. As the candles burned low, he saw a vision: Our Lady, standing in radiant light, holding a rosary. "Preach, my Psalter," she said. "Teach them to pray this way." When he awoke, the beads still shimmered in his memory like drops of light. And so the rosary was born not just as repetition, but as meditation, a way to walk through the mysteries of Christ's life. This became his fourth secret, to pray with the heart, not just the lips. Dominic taught that the rosary was not a charm or formula, but a rhythm of the soul, each Hail Mary a heartbeat in union with Christ. Through it, he found peace in chaos, clarity in confusion, and courage in despair. Those who prayed with him said it was like stepping into a river of grace. His voice, steady and calm, rose and fell like the tide, gentle, patient, full of love. The rosary became not just a weapon against evil, but a mirror of heaven's peace. And still, he never saw himself as holy. He often said, "I am only a beggar, holding out my hands to the mercy of God." This humility was his fifth secret, to see greatness only in God. Dominic's humility was not a performance, it was the natural light of truth. He knew that every gift, every insight, Every success was not his, but God's grace working through him. Even his failures became lessons in trust. When his first attempts to reform the church met resistance, he did not despair. He simply knelt again, whispering, "Lord, your work, not mine." And slowly, almost silently, the world began to change. He founded the order of preachers, the Dominicans, not to gain power, but to send disciples into the world as messengers of light, devoted to study, truth, and mercy. They were to be poor, learned, and free, so that no attachment could cloud their vision of God. The Dominicans carried his flame. Through the centuries, illuminating minds and hearts are like teachers, artists, theologians, and saints. But at the heart of it all remained the man who walked barefoot through the world, holding nothing but the gospel and his rosary. Dominic's sixth secret emerged from the rhythm of his days, to balance contemplation with action. He believed that prayer without service becomes empty, and service without prayer becomes blind. We must speak to God about men before we speak to men about God, he said. In his daily life, every act of kindness flowed from deep silence, and every silence led him back to love. And that, perhaps, was his deepest mystery, that heaven and earth were not far apart for him, they were joined by prayer, like light crossing a window pane. The seventh and final secret was not something he preached. It was something he lived until his last breath, to die still loving. In his final hours, Dominic was not surrounded by riches or relics, but by his brothers. He asked to be laid on the ground in the dust, saying, "I want to die in the house of poverty." His lips moved in prayer as he looked at the crucifix, and he whispered, "This is what I have desired to love and to be loved by God." His brothers wept as they watched the peace on his face, and they said it was as if he were falling asleep in the arms of the divine. Centuries have passed since that moment, yet Dominic's light still burns quietly, steadfastly in the hands of those who seek truth, mercy, and love. In our time, his 7 secrets are not distant relics, they are maps for the restless heart. To see Christ in others, to let your life preach, to pray for souls, to pray with the heart, to be humble, to balance prayer and service, and to love until the end. But to live them is to begin a journey, and that journey, like Dominic's, starts in the stillness of a single prayer, "Lord, what would you have me do?" The story of Saint Dominic does not end with his death, it begins there. After his passing, many of his followers would say that Dominic never truly left them. In their dreams, in their prayers, they would hear his voice, calm, clear, and full of light. He had once told them, "Do not weep. I will be more useful to you where I am going than I have ever been here." And he was right. His spirit did not vanish, it multiplied. From Spain to Italy, from France to the far reaches of the known world, the flame he kindled spread quietly through monasteries, through the hearts of men and women who refused to let the truth be forgotten. The world had seen saints who worked miracles of healing or prophecy, but Dominic's miracles were different. He healed blindness of the soul. He restored the sight of truth. One winter evening in Toulouse, a young scholar sat in the corner of a cold chapel. His mind was brilliant, his heart restless. He had spent years studying philosophy, searching for reason in a world that seemed only full of pain. He had grown skeptical of faith, mocking prayers as superstition. But that night, when he could no longer find sleep, he found himself kneeling beneath a statue of the Virgin Mary. He whispered into the silence, "If you are real, show me something true." Moments later, he heard the faint sound of footsteps. A friar entered, barefoot, carrying nothing but a rosary. He smiled, not in judgment, but in compassion, and knelt beside him. Sometimes, the friar said softly, "Truth comes when the mind stops shouting." They prayed together, one man full of questions, the other full of peace. By dawn, the scholar was weeping, not from fear, but from recognition. He said, "I have studied every word, but you made me feel the word." The friar's name was Dominic. Stories like this spread like holy wildfire. People who met him didn't just remember what he said, they remembered what they felt, a deep peace, as though heaven itself had brushed their hearts. Dominic never sought fame, yet his life became a living sermon of divine intimacy. Those who followed him discovered that his 7 secrets were not isolated virtues, they were steps of ascent, like rungs on a ladder reaching toward God. The first, seeing Christ in others, was the beginning of all transformation. To Dominic, no soul was too far gone. He would often say, "You cannot hate the sinner and love the cross, for Christ died for all." It was this conviction that allowed him to look into the eyes of enemies and see, not threats, but children of God waiting to be remembered. The second, to let your life preach, was his quiet revolution. In an age when religious arguments often became wars of pride, Dominic understood that holiness speaks louder than words. He would enter towns not to debate, but to live among the people. He ate what they ate, walked where they walked, prayed where they suffered. His presence itself became a message. Faith must be seen before it can be heard. Modern believers can still feel the truth pressing on their hearts. How often do we try to convince others of our beliefs with words alone? Yet Dominic shows that love is the only sermon no one can resist. One afternoon, as Dominic journeyed through the countryside, a storm rolled in. The sky darkened and rain fell in silver sheets. Seeking shelter, he entered a barn where a poor widow sat weeping beside her dying child. The boy's breath was faint, the woman's eyes were full of despair. Dominic knelt beside them, took the child's cold hand and whispered, "The Lord is near." He prayed not loudly, not theatrically, but with quiet certainty, as one who speaks to a dear friend. Then he pressed his rosary into the mother's hand and said, "Pray this not for miracles, but for peace." By morning, the storm had passed. The child lived. The mother told everyone that the moment Dominic prayed, the air in the barn had filled with warmth and light, as though the sun had entered the room. He never claimed credit for the healing. He simply smiled and said, "God's mercy needed a door. You opened it." That was the heart of his third secret. Pray for souls, not for victory. When we pray not to be right, but to love rightly, heaven listens differently. Dominic's prayers had power because they were not self-centered, they were self-forgetful. And from that forgetfulness came his fourth secret, to pray with the heart, not just the lips. Dominic's prayers were alive. Witnesses said that sometimes he would be found weeping, sometimes singing, sometimes lying prostrate on the ground. Each posture was a language of love. He prayed not to impress heaven, but to surrender to it. Even today, many who hold the rosary in their hands forget this. The beads are not meant to bind, but to free. Each one is an echo of Mary's yes, a reminder that surrender is not weakness, it is the doorway to peace. Dominic understood that every mystery of the rosary was a mirror of our own lives, joy, sorrow, glory, and light. He told his followers, when you meditate on Christ's life, you discover your own. For modern hearts, distracted by speed and noise, this practice is more necessary than ever. The rosary slows the soul. It teaches the heart to breathe again. But Dominic's humility gave it power. That was his fifth secret, the soul of all the others. His humility was not about thinking less of himself, but thinking of himself less. He never built monuments or sought titles. Even as he led an order that would shape theology for centuries, he still begged for bread, still washed the feet of the poor, still called himself God's errand boy. And it was this humility that made his words credible. The proud speak to be heard, the humble speak to heal. One of Dominic's followers once asked, "Father, why do you cry every night?" Dominic smiled and replied, "Because not everyone knows they are loved." He would cry not for himself, but for the world, for every soul too tired to pray, too wounded to hope, and in those tears, his brothers saw the face of Christ. Centuries later, Saint Catherine of Siena, another Dominican, would say that Dominic's tears were liquid fire, a love that burned without consuming. That fire became the lifeblood of the order of preachers, passing from generation to generation, from one wounded soul to another. Dominic's sixth secret, balancing contemplation with action, grew naturally from that fire. He knew that prayer alone could not heal the world, but neither could action without prayer. We must drink from the fountain before we pour for others, he told his brothers. So he built a rhythm into the Dominican life: study, pray, preach. To think deeply, to pray humbly, to speak boldly. The three strands wove together into a single mission truth through love. His life became a bridge between heaven and earth, between silence and speech, between the cloister and the marketplace. And perhaps that's why his final secret, to die still loving, was not an ending but a continuation. Love had been the beginning, the middle, and the end of all he did. Dominic's entire existence could be summed up in one sentence he once uttered softly to a brother: I have labored for souls, but it is God who has loved them. As the centuries passed, his order grew, producing great saints and scholars, from St. Thomas Aquinas to St. Martin de Porres. Yet in all their brilliance, they carried Dominic's same gentle spirit, reason illuminated by compassion, intellect anchored in humility, and in quiet chapels around the world, when the rosary beads slide between trembling fingers, his voice still seems to echo, "Pray as if every soul depends on it because one does." Centuries have passed since the night St. Dominic laid his head upon the cold ground and gave his soul back to God. Yet in the hush of monasteries, in the whisper of the rosary, in the hearts of the faithful who still seek light amid confusion, his presence lingers soft as candle flame, steady as prayer. Some saints leave behind grand cathedrals or relics of gold. Dominic left behind a way of life, a spiritual architecture invisible yet enduring. His 7 secrets were not formulas to memorize, but pathways to walk, roads that win through every human heart seeking meaning, peace, and God. And perhaps that is why his story still matters so deeply today, because even in the digital age where speed drowns silence and comfort numbs longing, Dominic's wisdom calls us back to simplicity, to love, to the still center where God speaks. Imagine for a moment that Dominic is standing beside you now, not in the robes of an ancient friar, but as a quiet companion in your modern chaos. He looks at your weary eyes, your restless heart, and smiles gently as if he knows. Because he does. He once lived in a time when faith seemed fragile, when truth was contested, when the church itself trembled under confusion and pride. And yet, in that darkness, he found 7 lights, each one small, but together, blazing bright enough to guide generations. The first light was seeing Christ in others. It was never about perfection. Dominic saw holiness not in angels, but in broken people trying to love. He understood that God often hides in the faces we overlook: the poor, the wounded, the skeptical, the tired. To see Christ in another person is to refuse despair. It is to believe that love is never wasted. How different our world would be if we lived that way. If, before every argument, every harsh word online, every judgment, we paused to remember, this person, too, bears the image of God. The second light, let your life be the sermon. Dominic preached through silence, through gentleness, through his very being. When people saw him, they saw coherence between word and deed. He was not perfect, but he was true. His life aligned with his message, and that integrity changed hearts. The third, pray for souls, not victory. How much of our prayer today, if we are honest, is about winning peace, winning success, winning approval? Dominic turned prayer upside down. He prayed not for triumph, but for transformation. He wept for those who opposed him because he loved them more than he loved being right. And when you pray that way, miracles happen. Not always in bodies healed or storms stilled, but in hearts softened, in burdens lightened, in invisible graces that ripple through time. The fourth, pray with the heart, not just the lips. When Dominic prayed, it was not ritual, it was relationship. He prayed as a man speaking to his beloved. His rosary was not repetition, it was conversation. He found in it the pulse of divine life, a way of keeping time with heaven. The fifth, see greatness only in God. His humility remains one of the purest lights in church history. He led thousands but owned nothing. He spoke to crowds but never sought applause. His joy was to be small before God, because he knew that smallness is not weakness, it is the space where grace can fill. The sixth, balance contemplation with action. He would say, first contemplate, then give to others the fruits of your contemplation. In other words, you cannot pour living water if you have not first drunk deeply yourself. His orders, motto veritas, truth was never about intellectual pride. It was about living honestly before God. Study was prayer, and prayer was love in motion. And finally, the seventh, to die still loving. This, perhaps, is the hardest and holiest secret. To love when life fades, to forgive when wronged, to smile when heaven feels far. Dominic's final words were not of regret or fear, but of hope. Lord, my task is done. He left the world not with bitterness, but with peace. These 7 secrets, lived quietly in one man's heart 8 centuries ago, have the power to heal ours now. Because they are not ancient, they are eternal. There is an image of Saint Dominic that many Dominicans cherish. It shows him walking along a dusty road, the sun setting behind him, a rosary in one hand and a book under his arm. He is looking upward not in pride, but in yearning. The artist captures something profound. Dominic was always walking toward the light, yet always bringing it back to those still in shadow. He did not try to escape the world's pain. He entered it. He did not chase ecstasy. He built endurance. He believed holiness was not in fleeing life, but in transforming it, turning ordinary acts into prayers, doubts into trust, and tears into offerings. In the noise of our century, that path still waits for us. Maybe for you, the road to holiness begins not with a miracle, but with mercy, not with certainty, but with sincerity, not with grand gestures, but with a quiet yes when you hold your rosary. Remember, you are not just counting beads, you are touching centuries of love when you help her. Stranger, remember, you are seeing Christ as Dominic did. When you pray for someone who has hurt you, remember, you are standing in the lineage of saints who believed mercy changes the world. Dominic's secrets are not commands, they are invitations. Each one calls us back to something our souls already know but often forget, to see the divine in the ordinary, to let our actions preach, to intercede, to pray deeply, to be humble, to act with wisdom, to love without end. In a world starving for authenticity, Saint Dominic's life whispers across time, be light, speak truth, love without measure. And maybe that's what transformation truly means, not the sudden turning of the world, but the slow conversion of the heart. There's a legend that says, after Dominic's death, a brother dreamt of seeing a path of light stretching from his tomb all the way to heaven. Along it walked countless souls, men and women he had never met, carrying books, rosaries, and candles. The brother woke in tears, realizing what it meant. Dominic's life had become a road for others to follow. Perhaps tonight that road opens before you too. Perhaps his 7 secrets are waiting not in distant history, but within your next prayer, your next act of mercy, your next quiet surrender. For in every generation, God raises a voice to remind us that the gospel is not an old story, it is a living invitation. And through the humble figure of Dominic D. Guzman, we hear it again, to love truth, to live mercy, and to walk humbly with God. If you find St. Dominic's stories inspiring and meaningful, please follow the channel, like the video, and stay tuned for more divine tales and timeless wisdom.